Now, we have very, very, very little time. I'm really tempted to close the session now, because we have really little time. We are out of schedule. You understand that? My role here, my mission, my function, my duty, my obligation is to make schedule followed, all right? So please take this seriously, have understanding towards me and my role. Now, one first round, possibly the only round, I see too many hands. I will not accept questions from people that have already today raised questions, because it is principle of democracy to give opportunity to everyone. So I see Professor Wilkinson, then a second one, the gentleman, and then another gentleman. Three. We have take three, and then we'll see if there is time. So please, Mike, you need the microphone. This is.
Thanks very much. My question is for Chantal. And I should preface the question by saying that I agree with 90%, even 95% of what you say. So it makes the 5 or 10% disagreement even more interesting. And it's both a disagreement, I think, in terms of the diagnosis and then also the prognosis. If we take your label, post-democracy, the phenomena that it captures, which include juristocracy, technocracy, the decline of party politics, parliamentarianism, I think is deeper than simply neoliberalism, and we can trace it back to the post-war reconstruction. The fear of popular sovereignty, most obviously in the case of the post-fascist systems. The flip side of that is that the solution needs to be more radical than you're perhaps willing to admit. And here, I think we have to acknowledge, whether I'm right or wrong about the first part, the constraints, the very real constraints in the current conjuncture that exist, particularly in the European Union. And this speaks to a certain asymmetry between the populism of the left and the right, and their possibilities to manifest their programs in within the constraints. So, and I'll give the example and then I'll ask the question. The asymmetry between the left and right-wing populism is at least two. One is the simplicity of the message that the right can offer versus the complexity and heterogeneity of the arguments from the left. And secondly, the right appears to be able to pursue its strategy and its programs within the existing structure, i.e. without rupture, whereas for the left, my suspicion is that maybe not revolution, but at least rupture is either a necessary, certainly not a sufficient condition. And the example of Syriza here, I think, is absolutely paradigmatic. The capitulation, ultimately, of Syriza in the face of the Troika is the example of why the left, at least, needs the possibility of rupture, i.e. the limits of reform within the existing system are such that we will just be talking and talking while the right is profiting unless rupture is available. Thanks.
Now, there is a question there on the corner. The gentleman there, please. The microphone.
Hello, thank you for your presentations. My question goes to speaker number 3, I guess, Pauline. Okay, I'm really not a fan of Donald Trump because I don't agree with some of his policies. Let's talking about the wall. Now, don't you think building the wall with Mexico can cause environmental problems? For example, the flow of water and wildlife. And also, you projected a wall here, and you mentioned on the wall that it was the wall between Europe and Africa. To my understanding, the wall was not built by Europe. It was built, Spain built the wall, and the wall was between Spain and Morocco, not Africa. Thank you. So Africa is not a country, it's a continent. Thank you.
Indeed, there is another.
My question goes as well to the speaker number 3, as we call it there. And first of all, I would like to...
It's not so nice, speaker number 3. I would prefer to give names. Yeah?
To the Professor Espejo.
Very well.
First of all, I would like to thank for the contribution, because a lot of times, systematically, the persons which don't came from the north of the world or no manner keep out from this kind of discussions. So I'm really happy to see you here. And the question is related to how our geographical interconnection makes all of us equal. You took the example of the house which is on fire, and saying that we are all equal, we will all pay the same consequences about this house, but actually, as I see it, the fact is that not all the world is in the same situation. The climate emergency, the climate crisis is already affecting the people in the south of the world. And while in Estonia, for example, it's the consequence that we are having is that we cannot go skiing. There are some countries which are paying, and in terms of resources like water and food scarcity. So how will this affect or exacerbate the consequences and the side effects of populism? Thank you.
Now, 3 questions, now 3 answers.
Okay. So in answer to Michael, well, I'm not sure we really disagree about that. The question is that, as I once say to my friend Wolfgang Streich, we were discussing a thing, and he said, well, the difference between you and me is that I don't feel so passionate, I'm not so passionately against the EU than you are. But I am, look, as you know, there is among left populism a big discussion about the EU. Some left populists believe that there is absolutely no way this kind of program can be done within the EU. Some other people are not so. For instance, Podemos is not anti-EU in the same way as Jean-Luc Mélenchon is, for instance. You know, so I think that the debate there, and I agree with you about. What's happened in Greece was a big shock. In fact, I used to be considered as some kind of left-wing Europeanist, let's say, defending Europe from a left point of view. And for me, the experience of Syriza was a big, big shock. I mean, shock, let's say. I was, in a sense, not so... it was a moment of reckoning, because then I began to really wonder, is it possible, you know, for a left populist strategy, when they come to government, to really have their program, and can you be anti-austerity? So it really was, it shocked me. And of course, I mean, the question is, can the EU be, let's start, obviously, the EU, as it exists, really existing euro, is a neoliberal project, and it will need to be at least very profoundly reformed in order for a left populist, program to come into practice. Can it be reformed? Well, some people, for instance, Thomas Piketty, or in a sense, Varoufakis with GM, there are people who believe that, yeah, they can be reformed. Other people, I'm thinking, for instance, Frédéric Lordon in France, say, no, it's impossible. I mean, one could, of course, say maybe Europe cannot be really reformed, it can be refunded, because the question for me, and honestly, I mean, I am in a very difficult position there, because I don't know where, which side I will be on, because I do believe that actual existing Europe is something that cannot be accepted. On the other side, I don't accept the solution of the sovereignists who say, for instance, La Pavitsas, for the people in Greece who decided, you know, that Greece should have defaulted and Greece should have. That's not solution either. The Greek people are not anti-European in the same way as the Spanish are not anti-European, because for them, Europe meant something very important. It was meant to come back to democracy. So you can't go against your people either. So the question is that can it be really reformed? I think that we cannot accept Euro as it is, but we can't really be without Europe, particularly at this crucial moment with Trump in the US and after all, with all its limitation, Europe is one of the little island of sanity which still exists, So I think, well, maybe probably you are more on the side of the, but you understand, I don't think one can be within or out. So that for me it's a real problem. But I'm not definitively, I don't know, I mean, it's very difficult that. But one thing I want to say is that I think that maybe I was not clear concerning what the radical reformism that I propose means, because I do believe that radical reformism implies some serious rupture. Radical reformism is not some, that's what I want to distinguish really it from the reformism, what I call the sterile reformism of the social liberals. No, there will be rupture, obviously. But it depends, if you think that it must be a rupture with the European Union, then I don't know, honestly. At some point, maybe it will be, but on the other side, it's really difficult to imagine. You cannot fight against neoliberalism only at the national level. I mean, that's obviously is not possible. So I think it's a real quandary. So I'm more open on this part where we might disagree. Let's say that I'm not as clear, because it seems to me that you are clearly more on the side of Lapavitsas than me. But it's maybe you're right. I mean, but only in practice will show. For instance, well, no, I'm stopping.
Thank you. And now I think it's Professor Espejo's turn to reply.
Thank you.
Last question.
So just a note, my name is Spanish, so actually my name is Ochoa. Ochoa Espejo, that's Spanish conventions. But I appreciate it, and speaker number 3 is fine if you ask the question to me. So there is, I think, we have an intuition, a common intuition. You think that there is a connection between the environment and the walls. But when people look for that connection, they tend to think, oh, animals can cross. Well, animals can't cross highways, and we don't complain about highways. There is something more important about the connection about the environment and the wall, and that is the connection between territory of the state and how we imagine geography. And we haven't been thinking in terms of territory and geography for about 100 years, because there was a way of thinking about territory and geography that the Nazis appropriated, and then people thought it was toxic. But we have to recover thinking about geography in an intellectual way, to think about how environment shapes societies, how climate, how water resources shape how we relate to one another, particularly how we share watersheds, how we share wells, how we share rivers, who's responsible for taking care of those, and how it matters where the border is in relations, what are the institutions related to those rivers and those wells. So I think that we share this intuition, and we share the intuition that what is nasty about Trump is that he emphasizes identity and de-emphasizes the physical places where these things are. Now, you're worried because I talked about Africa, and I agree with you that it is discriminating when people say that Africa is a country. But the wall is not between Spain and Morocco. The wall is between Schengen and Africa. And the wall, especially that one, is between the north and the south. And what is important is that people like you and me, who are immigrants from the South, learn how to talk to one another so that we can talk politics to those who speak for us all the time. We have different costumes, we have different ways of being, but we share spaces. We are together in the same place. And we have to make sure that people listen to us as well. And that is also part of the answer to you. Climate is already affecting people. We are already running out of water. The waters are rising all around us. The fires are already burning. And we share those spaces. It's up to us to organize ourselves so the Australians remember that they live in an island, but the island is not theirs. It's in the middle of an ocean, and the ocean does not separate them. We have organized, modern political thought has imagined countries as if they were desert islands, that people have a right to because they're private property. The Brits imagined, at the beginning of modernity, countries as desert islands that you claim for yourself. And that's how we organize colonialism. Now we have to stop thinking of countries as desert islands and begin to think of countries as watersheds. The watersheds are separated, but they are also connected. We share the waters on both sides of the watershed. And that is my take. I wrote a book on borders, if you want to take a look. It's indexed under O.
Now, this is a difficult decision whether I should go for another round. Let's say we stop here. We go on. So people want more. You want more? Okay. I had really a lot, because I'm. But anyway, you want more. So three questions more. One, then. Some women would be a very good addition. And then.
She wanted to. Didn't you ask her a question? Now she's hiding on.
The second one. No. Any other? And the third. All right. And that's the end of the story. Okay.
Right. Hello. Thank you very much, all four panelists, for coming here. I have two quick questions. The first one would be for Professor Mouffe, but actually to all panelists. It seems to me when I read literature on populism and when I listen to discussions about it, that the role of the elites are somehow mentioned. The elites are mentioned as somehow a passive subject that is the object of loath from populist movements, but I never hear discussions about how the elite is active. Often, I believe in instrumentalizing populist movements. Brexit was an elite, was very strongly influenced by the elite, the British elites. Donald Trump, although we could argue whether he's an elite or not, has received the support from, well, Fox News, and has received, his movement has received input from billionaires. The Republican Party, it can be considered an elite. Matteo Salvini in Italy has, new reports are arising, has received money from American billionaires. So what are the elites really that passive? What would be their role in using or fanning populism? Then the second very quick question in response to Professor Vallespin's final comment on the need to generate contrary emotions to those emotions of hatred that populists would create. But doesn't that simply generate two different spheres that don't talk to each other and thus perpetuate the problem? Can there be a real breakthrough if we do that? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And I want to ask to Professor Chow, and I wanted to ask if we can get your lecture notes like after the seminar for today, because I was really interested in some of the points you made concerning the war. And secondly, my question is to Professor Fernando. And I like the point where you made the part where you said populism could be medicine and it could be poison also. So I want to ask, and you said Donald Trump going into power for the next 4 years could be poison to the United States or to the world. And I want to know why you feel so, and why do you make such bold assertion that it's going to be poison for the next 4 years? Thank you.
Now you can hear me. Okay, thank you. I have many questions, but since I'm presenting tomorrow, I will get the microphone again. Just one brief question, unfortunately again, to Paulina. What you mentioned in the end, or your definition of the people, as you are here now with us, when we start to think about kind of policy making or political planning, then it makes sense if we are talking about environmental policy, for instance. But how do you make future plans if the people is that you are now here with us? Thank you.
Well, three interesting questions, and now we will have the three interesting replies, I'm sure.
No, go ahead. No, okay, regarding the question of elites, yeah, it's very difficult because it is generally an elite who claims to be talking in the name of the people. So, you know, the elites within populist discourse function as, as those against whom you pose yourself, right? So it can be a social class. So it's like La Casta for Podemos, for instance, or it can be the strangers, so non-Germans or migrants, non-Estonians, right? So, but I think all populism share a certain disregard, or at least are continuously attacking one very particular elite, which is the technocratic elite of the European institutions, because it has important implications to internal policies in the different countries. And so I think they are an elite that's easy to be targeted because it's a small elite with a lot of influence, and I think that's. And so it can be perfectly well defined, or your own political class, for instance, right? So, when Podemos used the term La Casta, there was a book, in Italy that used the same term before. I think they adapted it from there. So when you talk about La Casta, you talk about an elite that, no matter to the party that it represents, they represent themselves because they share certain privileges. So it's political class in the strict sense, so that they all share an objective position that defines them as class, right? And I think that's, it differs from the different kinds of, regarding the different kinds of populist movements and countries. So you would always have to, you always have to position yourself in order to see what an elite is. And so sometimes the leaders of a populist movement are part of the elite, of course, a political elite or even intellectual elite or whatever, right? And then poison, yeah, well, I think it would be like poison for the institutions of the United States, but it's my personal opinion. Maybe nothing happens, or the system is capable of controlling, Donald Trump. But my take is that after having observed what happened during the impeachment procedure, the idea that has spread to all the American and international public is that if you're an elected president, following the procedural rules, of course, and you can count on your party, you can do whatever you want. So if the main goal of a democracy is the control of power, and I think it is, right? So at least liberal democracy, then what that means is that except for maybe the intellectualized press or for a certain web pages or other media, I mean, the president will be widely uncontrolled. And so in that sense, then he will break a certain dam, that had been created for for hundreds of years. In the case of the United States, of course, it will be broken in very, very few years, right? So I hope this is not a right prognosis, but there's always the problem that, liberal democracy is based on controls. And if you break those controls, as Orban is doing, with the judiciary, or as Johnson's trying to do by shutting down parliament, for instance, in order not to debate, how to get out of, how to make the Brexit, and so on and so forth, then, populism ceases to be the force that allows us to, to sit and think about the failures of our democratic systems and turns into, the greatest threat for a democratic system. And I think the interesting thing is that it's both things at the same time, right? And that's and so what we ought to do is try to stick to the first part, right? To the critical part, and therefore try to, through the right analysis of what populism means, try to make a diagnosis that allows us to refurbish democracy, to create a new balance between the democratic and liberal principle. And in that sense, I'm relatively hopeful, right? Maybe not for the United States, I'm sorry, but, for Europe.
Notes, yes, of course. It's a pleasure. Society, planning, policymaking. We imagine to make plans, we need to know who society is. But you imagine that society is composed of nations or families or identity groups. But when you make plans, you are neglecting that if you already think in terms of territorial jurisdictions. You're thinking in terms of places. So imagine that you go to live to Argentina tomorrow. Estonia will keep on going, right? So we make plans without thinking of particular individuals. We make plans as the proper metaphor is not a family, but a choreography. You are coordinating movement. What matters are positions and relations. It doesn't matter who occupies those positions and relations. It is not the individuals or their identity that matter, but how we coordinate them when they are together. So if you imagine driving on the right side of the road or the left side of the road, it doesn't matter who is doing it. What matters is that they go on the right or the left so that they don't crash. So we already do it in terms of places. That's how we do it. And we have to see it that way and stop imagining that we are a family.
Well, I think you wanted more, you have more.
Thank you.
I'm sorry.
Yes, well, I don't like to use this term, the elite, because it is usually used by the people who are critical of populism. It's, populism is against the elites. In fact, there is very seldom the populist movement that define them as the elites. And in fact, I think that is, I prefer really, as I say, is distinction between the people from below and the people from above. you know, or sometimes the people and the establishment. But the establishment is something much, you know, comprehensive, more comprehensive. By saying the elites, you already, in fact, define how you see the establishment. And, you know, I'm not saying that some populist movement do not define that way, but it's not how one should understand the frontier established by the populists. It's the people from below and from above. And then, of course, the people from above are going to be, you know, defined in different ways according to the analysis that we are going to do. For instance, left populism defines them as the oligarchy. Clearly, is saying in terms of socio-economic things, not in terms of, you know, because elites is so vague that, you know, the people, the artists can be seen as the elite, the people, important footballers, the elite, you know, and I don't like even the term of the rich. All that are simplification, because I think that if you are going to give really some analysis of what's the problem with our societies, and I think this is in what that sense that populism is really framed today, reaction, as I was saying, resistance is against post-democracy and against neoliberalism, then of course you are going to define your opponent, them in different ways. For instance, for Trump, let's say the establishment was the Democrats and the people and their allies in Hollywood and all the people who were, you know, defending a certain type of people. So it did not call them the elite, but it's more the establishment. You see, there is a difference between elite and establishment. So I don't think that one should really use the distinction as being fundamentally between the elites and the people. The elites is already a way of defining or giving some identity to the them. There are many more ways in which this them is defined, and as far as I'm concerned, for a left populism, the them is not the elites. It doesn't mean much. It's the oligarchy, all those who really represent the forces of neoliberalism. This is really the them for left populism.
Well, thank you. But now Professor Kiste would like to add something, I understand.
Just a short remark, since as a lawyer, one is quite readily addressed as elite. If democracy is not only about limiting public authority, but also of identity building, of forming the demos and ourselves as part of the demos, and if this also means producing public reasons, and if these procedures producing reasons for public decisions are threatened by the restructuring of the media, by raising walls, internal and external walls, it is our responsibility as intellectuals, as professors, as lawyers, to keep the democratic discourse open. And if this would make us an elite, I would be happy to take this responsibility and belong to the elite. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think with these words, we can end our first day of conference. Thank you very much to all.